All right, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It is a nice Saturday and it's actually kind of bright in my room, so I've closed all my windows a little bit and made it easier for everyone to see. But as you can tell, I have a room full of plants. This is actually this is my house. So this is my actual collection that I've been growing for a little while. A little bit about me. Again, my name is Taylor Pochron. I am the assistant manager at Sloat Gardens by the zoo in San Francisco. So one of those the large ones. And I am doing a lot of things there. I buy succulents, I buy hard goods, I buy a lot of different stuff, but I also do a lot of houseplant care and a lot of talking to people about houseplants. So I am always excited about doing a class about houseplants and how to take care of them and to really help people find really cool ones, as well as make sure the ones that they have are growing properly and then multiplying their collection. So today I really wanted to talk about a bunch of different plants that I have. It's kind of hard to narrow it down when you have a lot of them that you really like, but I decided to kind of focus on plants that are more on the trailing varieties. So these are plants that actually will cascade out of their pots. These are ones that have kind of like a vining element to it. So I find that these are very easy to take care of most of the time. There are a very wide variety of plants that you have in available to you in this kind of style. So be it higher light or lower light, ones that can grow both indoors and outdoors, as well as ones that have really cool colors. Many of them will flower. Most houseplants or most plants in general flower, but sometimes they're a little bit more spontaneous and really beautiful, and they actually have a lot of colors, and sometimes you don't really see the flowers so much. So I have a few to talk about that. Yeah, I'm really excited to kind of get going and pick the plants and talk about them. But a little bit more about me of why I actually grow plants. It is, of course, my job. I found myself at Sloat Gardens after college, where I studied botany in Santa Cruz. I really enjoy actually learning the more scientific growth of plants. So I really looked into cellular growth and how things actually respond to lights and soils and all that kinds of stuff. But I found that I actually really didn't know how to grow plants very well, even when I started working at Sloat. I had maybe one or two houseplants in my house, didn't really think about them, didn't really take care of them too well, but working at that store and actually talking to people, talking to many of you, I'm sure many of you in chat actually come and see me at Sloat, gives me a lot of information and ideas. And then as the past couple of years, it's been about 5.5 years of growing houseplants and working there, my collection is exploded. I have a room that is full of plants. I can even just do a quick spin around. This is in the back of my house, and it's a little bit hard to see, but the room is pretty full wall to wall. All the counters are covered. If I have a space to put a plant, the plant usually goes there. So I just wanted to kind of talk to that element of sometimes people, when they come in, they only have one or two plants, and it's always good to talk to them about how to take care of that one specifically and give it the little nutrients or the soils or whatever it needs to kind of grow well. But I also talk to a lot of people that have a large collection of plants, and yes, they might know a lot about growing them, but sometimes it's a little bit overwhelming. So I wanted to talk today about what it's like to actually have a really big collection and to both propagate it and take care of them in the long term. So let me get into some of the plants. Let's actually just show you what I'm talking about and get going. Again, like Jen said, if you have some questions, throw it into our Q&A. If she can bring them up during the class, I will answer them, but at the end, I can go over them. I also have an outline that I put on our website, as well as it might have been sent to you through the email. And on that outline, there is a full list of all the plants I'm going to be pretty much talking about today in their scientific name and their common name and their varieties. And so I might start spouting off a few Latin names here and there. I might be saying a lot of plant names, and if that's a little bit daunting, definitely check out that list and try and match up the name to what I said. And then you can always go into the store and ask them about a specific plant that you saw in the webinar that you really liked and you want to maybe get for yourself. Also on that list is a big shopping list of interesting little hard good products. And so these are products that really help out when you're growing a lot of plants. It's from sprays to different kinds of soil amendments to fertilizers, gloves, snips, all those kinds of things. They're not completely necessary. All you really need is a plant, a pot, and some water, but all these little kinds of things can help out. And so if you have questions based around maybe some of the stuff on the shopping list, or as I go through talking about the plants, I'll pick them up and let you know. All right, so I wanted to start easy in the very beginning, just because we're kind of working into this and seeing the interest across the board for all my plants. Many of you, I'm sure, know this. This is the silver splash pothos or the Scindapsus pictus. A really interesting, cool plant, and it's actually the first one I bought. It's the first plant I got when I started working at Sloat, and it's probably the biggest plant in my room right now. Biggest plant in the sense of length. Actually, I have some pretty large ones and tall ones, but is one that I've had for a long time. It is growing. I can't show you the main mother plant because it is growing from the ceiling corner of my room all the way across all my windows. It's kind of trailing around. It's kind of crazy looking. I need to take care of that sometime soon, but I wanted to show you some of the propagations I made from it. And it's probably my favorite part about growing plants is being able to trim them, propagate them, and then get more plants, because that's just what we like. When you have lots of plants, you want more plants. It's kind of hard to stop. But these ones are in little basic pots, and I wanted to show just one thing I've noticed whenever I sell a lot of plants to people in the store, and also a lot of plants that we get in from different growers, is you usually see, if you have a little 4-inch pot, like this one, it's pretty nice. You have some leaves that are really close to the base, and you have some leaves that are sticking up and some new growth points. So something to look at whenever you're picking out a plant, and I wanted to use this as an example, is look for how many stems are actually inside the pot. Look for how many parts are going into the soil and growing out. And also take a look at the large leaves at the base versus the smaller or the newer growth coming up, because a lot of times, and I'm going to show you in a second about propagating some of these plants, how they're grown is they're trimmings and they're cut. They're either put in water or in sphagnum or some sort of growing medium to get those roots to grow out. And then the new shoot comes out from the base of that plant, and it's not the actual leaf that's in the pot that is going to keep on growing. That is just helping support that new stem. A new shoot will grow from the base where those roots started to grow into the soil, and that is the actual growth point. So sometimes when you see a plant in the store and it has beautiful big leaves on it and it's flowing out of the pot, make sure that those are the ones that, I mean, it's always nice to have them, but they might be the ones that are the original leaves from the mother plant, and then the new growth is coming out of them. And just always check on your new growth, because you want to see that if the plant is healthy, it has some nice new light green tips. You don't want to have kind of crinkliness, or if there's no new growth, then maybe they're just really fresh cuttings, and that can be okay, but also it'll definitely prolong the time it takes for your plant to really grow into a larger plant for your specimen collection. So just wanted to use this as a nice example of a way that when you look at a plant in the store, especially young ones, what you're actually looking for, the different parts of the growth, what they actually mean. But also, it's a really pretty one. I love the little silver splash kind of decoration on it. And like I said, it's one of the first ones I got. So it is something that I've multiplied and propagated many times now. I've given them some away. I have some in pots around my other parts of my house. And it's a really good one. And another one that is actually very similar, and I wanted to just start with the pothos because most people know the pothos. It's a very common plant. It's actually a plant name that covers a couple different species and a few genus actually. This is the Scindapsus, and there's also the Epiprimnum. So I'll bring you a little bit closer to that. Another really common pothos is the Marble Queen. This is an Epiprimnum, and it is a little bit more green. It has a slightly more waxier kind of coating, and you can see I have it right now growing from a pretty high point in my room all the way down. It's chained all the way past even the plants in this kind of area. And so when I say a trailing plant, it's a plant that will, of course, cascade and trail down, but it's not like a specific type of plant that is a trailing plant. It's just how the plant grows. And so if your plant is going over the side of the pot and going down, it's usually considered a trailing plant. But I also have to say that it has to be some sort of vine. Each leaf node, if you look at it, each leaf node has a leaf coming out of it. Really cool thing about the, here, look at closer with this one, about the pothos, is they actually have on their little leaf nodes, tiny little root sections coming out from each where each leaf is. And that's what makes it so easy to propagate and take care of. The plant already by itself, if you cut it on either side of the leaf, already has a root system that is there. And once you have a root system, the plant usually can survive through a lot. Once it has a way to uptake water and nutrients, It can grow new leaves, it can grow new stems, and it's usually going to survive if it has the right conditions of light and other kinds of stuff around it. But in general, you always want to get a root system, and the best thing about the pothos is they kind of just make the root systems naturally. The interesting thing about that is that when you make a root system on your vine naturally, it's really showing you that the plant is trying to grab onto things. A lot of times these plants are crawling around the ground, and so they're rooting into the ground as they go, and then they find something that they like to climb on, or some sort of tree or bark or big bush or whatever it is, and they start to go up, because all plants want to hit the sun. They want to get as much light as possible, so they want to grow up. And when you're a plant that has a really flimsier stem, like most trailing plants, you can tell that they're not upright. They actually kind of cascade over the pot because their stems or their vines are on the flimsier side. They're more vegetative. They don't have a lot of structure to push them upwards. They have to use something else to grow up on. So I'm going to pull you again over here. The next plant I really wanted to talk about in this kind of context is the Monstera Andersonii, or Andersonii. These are the plants that many people know about. It is the one that has the really cool fenestrations. A fenestration is the hole in a leaf. People usually know it from the Monsteras. A whole bunch of aroids in general will have this kind of hole pattern throughout its leaf. They're really highly sought after. And one thing that's really cool about this one, it's very similar growth to a pothos. A lot of the Monsteras and philodendrons have that kind of same growth where it has a vine, and I have it right now on a moss pole. So technically I wouldn't consider this right now a trailing plant, but it is a plant that would naturally trail, but right now it's growing up a moss pole. And then every single time a leaf grows, it actually has a root system growing into the pole, giving it support and growing up. And that is how you actually, people have now been discussing it, it's how you get larger leaves. This plant was not looking like this a little while ago. I actually almost gave up on it. It was really small. The leaves were not very big, not really great fenestrations. And I'll show you, this is its mother plant. Not the best looking, not really that exciting, but you can see when it is not trailing or not climbing up and it just does the trailing aspect, the leaves are a lot smaller. These leaves have just little 2-3 little fenestrations. They're very small. If they actually had a little bit of support, if they could actually grab onto something, they actually tend to grow a lot bigger. The plant goes into between its more young, immature leaves, which are little ones that it uses to kind of crawl around or find places to grow. And once it starts getting established, once those roots actually find something to grow into, they tend to grow a lot bigger. They get a lot more full. They actually want to grow up. They actually want to take over the space. They know that they're in their mature leaf growing stage. So one thing I always kind of talk to people about when they have these really nice trailing plants is they look beautiful as they cascade down, but many of them, especially ones that grow those roots on each of the nodes, if you grow them on some sort of pole or some sort of wooden block, you actually get a really nice big leaf out of them, and it's really pretty. So it's something to always think about when you're growing your plants is, they're going to grow and adapt to the situation that you give them. All the plants in my room are right now adapted to my room. When you get a new plant, a lot of times you'll have a varied of leaf sizes. So they're either really big, or maybe they are really colorful, or they have some really interesting growth to them. But when you bring them into your house, your new growth might not look as spectacular. I mean, that's really common, and you kind of have to work with that because it is now adapting to your situation. A lot of these plants are grown in really pretty, beautiful greenhouses that are temperature regulated, that are water regulated, that are using lots of nutrients and fertilizer to kind of keep them growing really nice and big. So when we bring them into our like locations in our houses, we don't have all that, and that's totally fine. They definitely adapt and they grow. They like to kind of work with the situation that they have, but the more you can kind of bring it towards that aspect or that kind of environment that they would really appreciate, you get some better growth or some more ideal growth that you would really want to get to. So as you're looking around at these cool aroids and plants that you have in the store, definitely think about, what kind of plant it is, maybe what kind of style it usually grows in nature, and how it's been grown in the greenhouse or where it is. Definitely talk to all of our staff and all of our all of our stores, because a lot of them will know maybe where the plant's from, or they've grown it themselves, or they have some insight on, like, we know this one might like a little bit more water here, or it might want actually a trailing aspect in this situation, or if you can give it a pull, it might grow like this. So definitely always ask questions, and also try it out. It's always nice to get a plant, and sometimes even get 2 plants, put them in different situations, see how they react to the environment that you give them. And then from that, you can use that empirical data to actually grow a really cool plant and have different kinds of situations for them. Like I said, I have a lot of these plants across my house. They're all in different areas. So I kind of see how they react to those different spots, where if it is more sun or anything like that. But those are like some of the more simpler ones. I think everyone knows about the pothos. Many people know about the Addisonii, or Addisonii, I think is how it's said. But another one I really want to kind of talk about is the Tradescantia. So these are plants that are also very widely grown throughout all of our houses, and many people have some of the more common varieties. I have one here that I really like. It's the Spathaceae. So it's the Tradescantia Spathaceae. It is this really interesting tricolor plant that has a nice purple and lightish green, kind of icy blue coloration that has these really nice stripes all the way across it. Hopefully it's coming through on the camera, but it's one of the prettiest plants I have in my room because of how purple and pink it is, and how it's right now growing really nicely forward. And I wanted to talk about a few different things with this plant, because first off, wherever you place your plant, it's going to grow towards the light, right? We talked about that when it's going to be growing up on a pole, or if it's growing up towards the sun, it wants to grow up. But when it's in our rooms, usually our windows are not on our ceiling, although if you have a skylight, that is awesome, and I wish I had one. But many of us have our windows on the walls or on the sides, and the plant will always be growing towards the light. And I want to show the dirtier backside of a plant sometimes isn't that pretty. I left on all of these old leaves to just kind of show that, you know, plants, as they grow out, especially the plants in the Tradescantia family, the spiderworts, there's a few different names for them. These ones grow very quickly, usually. And also they tend to have leaves that die off in the back of them. So they don't stay completely green all the way up the stem, because the plant puts a lot of energy into its top growth, or its most forward growth that's going maybe towards the sun, and then lets the other leaves in the back kind of die off. So it is very normal for a plant to have dead leaves on them. Nothing is permanent. Flowers and leaves all have a lifespan. They all, sometimes they can live a long time, but sometimes they don't do so well. And it really is a good thing to get into habit of going in, checking your plants, cleaning them off, but don't always freak out when you see a dead leaf. If you see a yellow leaf on a vining plant, it usually means that that plant just didn't have enough energy to keep that leaf going. But it also is a good indication for you to think about, how is it taken care of in the past couple of weeks? Did I let it go very dry? Did I have too much water in it? Has it been really, really sunny in that window? Has it been really, really shady? Have I put it in the corner? Is it covered in dust? All these kinds of questions of care can actually really reflect onto the leaves, because a plant that is a little bit more stressed will lose its leaves a little bit faster in this natural process that is totally common, but it will happen a little bit quicker, depending on the care that you give it. One reason why I really wanted to show off this plant, because first off, it's pretty, but it also is a really easy one to propagate. So I've actually been cutting this one and propagating it a couple of times. I have them throughout my house. Like this one right here is a cutting that I just had on one of my windowsills. It's been right on my windowsill, right near the light there. Things that are next to the window often can get a little bit damaged because of the temperature change that happens in a glass area. So you do have to watch out for that. It's been doing really well though. You can kind of see there is a full root system ready to go. I absolutely could transplant this into some soil or some sort of potting medium to grow it.
Taylor, how did you cut that? How did you cut that to propagate?
How did I cut it? No, it's a great question. Let's get into it. Because I have a couple of them, right? And like I said, they're easy to grow. And something I use, here's on my shopping list, I mentioned the Fiskars snips. You can get any kind of snip you like. You can use a scissor, you can use a pruner. I just really like these. I use them the most in our store just because they are nice and sharp. They're really easy to use. They have a little kind of closing handle and they're just kind of handy to have and you can kind of really get into the plants and cut them. So I'll do this to a couple of my plants. So let's talk about it. When you have a stem that is growing out farther than you really want to, like something that is maybe growing in a direction that you're like, you know what, it's growing out here, it's pretty, but it could be cut to actually grow. What you can do is, here, let's find a good one. This one right here, leaf nodes going all the way up. I want to cut beneath one of the leaf nodes. Just a quick trim, right? Don't be too scared. Sometimes I worry about losing a plant or trimming a plant, but there you go. I have one right here. You can see I have some older leaves kind of died away on the bottom. I have some newer leaves coming up to the top, and then your new growth at the very top. And for this plant, it doesn't have any roots that are already growing on it. And so what I would like to do is just kind of gently pick off and trim off some of these bottom leaves. I don't want to pull too hard or rip apart the stem. I want to keep it there as neat as possible. So sometimes I'll even kind of tear off the leaf or trim it off if I have a little snip. These ones are really easy to kind of tear off. And so now I have a little bit more of a clean base or clean stem to this cutting. And with the Tradescantias, I find that they grow really well in water. A little glass of water, pop it in. Very, very simple. It's right now sitting in the water down the bottom. It doesn't have any water near the top. This is something that, of course, water evaporates. So it's going to kind of drop down. You fill it back up again, it's going to drop down. If your water is not draining away or not evaporating too quickly, or in general, it's always good to kind of give it a clean. You can see sometimes the water gets a little bit muggy and dirty and a lot of algae will form or any kinds of things will form and get a little bit dirty. So it's always good to pour out that excess water, put some new water in it. I find that if you replace your water probably every week, you're doing great. It'll work out really well. The plant will actually grow its roots a little bit quicker when it has nice clean water to grow into. If you do it every 2 weeks, it works out really well. That's what I usually do. If you do it every month, it works out fine. Every year, you might kind of get a little bit more scumminess on the growth. It might not be as healthy in the long run, but it's something that if you do it a little bit more often, you'll get a little bit more out of it.
Taylor, can you get like root rot if it's just sitting in dirty water? Can the roots rot out? Or like, so if you clean the water, then that's a way around it.
I would say so. So I don't think it's completely considered fully root rot because I think root rot comes a lot of times from a soil mixture that is overwatered, and it's the microbes in the soil mixture and it's forming a type of fungus on the roots that I think kill it away. I don't completely know the actual full structure of root rot. Is a little bit confusing and haven't looked into it too much, but it's usually something you consider talking about when it's in like a potting medium. I think making the argument that if the soil or the water is very dirty and you don't change it out, that can be a root rot because you are going to get a lot of weird microbes growing on your root systems that are going to probably take up all the extra oxygen in the water, and that can kind of cause some dieback. So it is something to worry about, that if you are letting your plant just sit there in dirty water for too long, it can cause some damage. I'm not really sure if it's considered root rot or not, but it's something that you should watch out for.
Great.
All right, I'm going to do one more. I have this long, we just talked about it, this pothos up here, a nice stem of it. It's growing out really nice all the way down, and we're going to come in and we're going to cut it. It's okay. It's going to grow back. They all do really well. And this is a plant that I have many of, so I'm not worried about cutting back one of my long stems. So you can see I took actually a longer piece of it going all the way down, because instead of cutting it just at the very, very tip, just to take off those end leaves, which would work out and would actually grow pretty quickly, I wanted to have the plant to build the ability to grow back from the top, maybe even getting a branching pattern or having a new growth come up from near the actual root structure, which allows it to have a really prettier cascade instead of having a part where it's cut near the end and then a split off near the end, because it kind of looks like a split end kind of thing. So whenever I'm doing prunings of longer plants, I tend to take off a larger stem and propagate that whole stem. or a larger vine or whatever it is and propagate that whole piece instead of going back and trimming off just little pieces of all of it and then kind of having a plant that doesn't grow back as nicely later on. So one more quick talk about trimming them because we're right in this kind of conversation. If you come in and you see again, you have a leaf node right here. You have a root structure right underneath it. If I come and I just trim on either side of it, I fall into my floor. If you trim on either side of it, it'll actually be able to grow pretty well. Something I did right here that I like to do, if you have a leaf that has a node and then you have another node with no leaf on it, I usually take that as the one that's going to go into the water. So when I have my water or even my moss or whatever I'm growing it into, if I have two nodes and one of them has a leaf and one of them doesn't, I'll put the one that has no leaf into the soil or into the water or whatever the medium is and allow that to start growing out from there. And then the plant will actually continue to grow either from the node up top or even from the node in the water. Kind of hard to say, sometimes they do their own thing. And it's a fun thing to do. It's something that you can kind of just come in, snip, you don't have to worry about too much. Cut off pieces, put them in your water. And then pretty quickly, without even that much care, you have another little plant that is going to grow. You put it on your counter, you put it in your windowsill, you put it near your other plants, somewhere where it gets a decent amount of light. And generally when you have cuttings, especially when they're young, you don't want to put them right in a blaring hot window. You don't want to put them too far into the corner of the room. You want to have a nice natural lighting that is bright and indirect. That's the word that everyone hears, bright indirect. I could probably describe every plant that wants bright indirect light, but it works out really well for cuttings because you want it to be very soft light on them for them to start growing their new leaves, start growing their new stems without too much extra stress because they're already going through a lot of stress being cut and put into here without the support of their mother's root system. All right. A couple more plants on the same boat where I've been propagating them because pretty much everything I chose today I've done some sort of propagation of is another one of these Tradescantias because again, they're so pretty. Look at the color. It's bright purple and it's almost like iridescent. It sometimes has a shine to it. This is the Tradescantia Nanook. I can't remember the actual species name, but everyone calls it the Nanook. And they are one of the slower growing Tradescantias. So you'll see these in a lot of stores. They're considered one of the more specialty or maybe even a rare plant, but that word doesn't really mean too much in the plant world right now. It just depends on your location and what they can get and what's available. These are definitely grown all over the place, and you can see them in a lot of our stores and a lot of stores all over the California area, and I'm sure anywhere in the world that you're at where you have a nursery. So one thing about them, like I said, they grow pretty slow, which is different from other kind of Tradescantias because I find that they usually grow really, really quickly, and I can't even like keep up with them. They tend to outgrow their pots or outgrow their water that I have them in, and I have to cut them again and again and again. This one, not so much. I haven't done too many trimmings of them because of that reason. I have one growing right now, just in a little water vase. It has a full root system on it. And let me show you. Like the other one I was saying, these don't have root nodes that already grow, and they tend to grow their roots from the base, from the ring around where the leaf would be coming out of. It grows in a circle around it. Instead of growing one root that kind of just trails around and finds something, these ones grow a kind of ring of very fibrous, lighter roots. And so sometimes those more fibrous root systems, if you have a plant that grows them, are a little bit more tender. You have to be careful a little bit more with them rather than a more chunkier, thicker vining root that you can see in some of these other plants that we talked about. So every plant has a little bit of different kind of growth style. It's always good to see what you like about them and see how they grow for you. The thing about the Nanook as well is it tends to have a little bit more structure. So looking at the stems of your plant, sometimes they are very flimsy and they will cascade completely. And sometimes you actually have this one that is growing up. So it has a little swoop to it. And that means that it has a good amount of strength in those stems, that it can grow up a little bit more on itself. So these are great plants for areas that you want to have a bit of a cascade and then into a little bit more of an upward swoop instead of just going all the way down and trailing really, really far. On the exact opposite side, like those ones that trail really, really well and they want to just keep on growing down, I have a plant here that many people also know. They were very trendy for a good while, and they're a little bit more difficult to grow. It's called the string of turtles. It's a type of peperomia. I think it's called Peperomia prostrata, but string of turtles is definitely the common name for them. It's a little bit hard to see in here, but they have a really nice little pattern on the leaves that looks like a turtle shell. They're very, very cute, and I immediately wanted one when I saw it. But I also killed the first one I had. And that's something I actually talked about with a lot of people is they're a little bit more difficult to initially take care of because they tend to rot out. I've noticed that this plant needs very little water or not very often watering, that you want to water them thoroughly. Whenever you water a plant, you want to water it thoroughly, but you don't want to do it very often, especially not from above. I've noticed that if I just water this plant like I water all my other plants where I'm not really thinking about it, and I just kind of like go and I'm just making sure everything has a little bit of water every once in a while, and I don't think about it and I water over the top of it, the stems and the connections to the soil at the very top of the plant rot out very, very quickly. And whenever I sell this plant to someone or talk about their peperomia string of turtles, I always say, when you're watering it, it's almost always better to water it from below. I don't really try to do that with a lot of my plants. It's a good method for a lot of watering is actually having a saucer, something like whatever kind of saucer you have. I had in my my shopping list, buy some extra saucers, have some on hand. It's always helpful to have a little bit of a saucer to kind of drop something into, especially if you're trying to water it. You just put it into the saucer, you fill it up with water to the very brim of the saucer, you let it sit. You let it sit for maybe half an hour or however long it takes. Watch the water get soaked back up. If you're sitting there for about an hour or so and there's still water in the saucer, your plant probably has enough water already inside of it. It probably already had the capillary action pulling up the water from the bottom to the top, and it's done at that point. It's well hydrated and you can put it back to where it was, either in your saucer, but for the case of this plant, I have it hanging. I have it hanging right by my bed. I don't really think about it. I try not to think about it. I don't really want to overwater it. So maybe every, I'd say about 2 weeks or so, I give it a little bit of a bath in water to hydrate it up, and then I let it sit. So these are plants that also I haven't really propagated. They're a little bit more difficult. I think laying them on top of a moss or laying them on top of a soil would be the best way to propagate them, just because you don't really want to stick these stems into the soil. I find that if you put them in the soil, a lot of times when you are propagating, you have to add a little bit extra water. And if it's sitting in a little bit more water soil and doesn't have any root systems on it, it's probably going to rot. It's not going to do too well. I'm sure other people have had much more success with it. I haven't tried too much, but if you're trying to propagate little peperomias, especially these little kind of trailing ones, be very careful with it and lay them on top of soil, almost like a little succulent. And if you're asking what I mean by growing it on moss or what that actually means, I have a few to show you what I've been doing a lot recently and how I actually propagate some of these plants. If I don't put it into a glass or a jar or whatever kind of water source, I usually put it into some sort of container with sphagnum moss. Now, sphagnum moss is an amazing planting medium. I think always having a little bit around is a good idea. They come in bags, they come in cubes, they're dried and dehydrated. You kind of hydrate them back up, they sponge up. People use them a lot of times for orchids or different kinds of mounting. So if you ever see a mounted orchid or a mounted staghorn fern or some sort of cool plant on the wall, it's usually surrounded by sphagnum moss. And it's because it has a really good amount of water absorption, it knits together really easily, and roots grow in it really well. It's for some reason a very nice medium for roots to just kind of crawl through really easily. Why I think that is because it simulates the decomposing matter or the matter on the ground of like a rainforest or a forest floor or somewhere that, or even a bog, of course, where they're grown. where you have a lot of different kinds of plants and stuff growing together, usually pretty wet or hydrated. And it's a soft substance that the roots can kind of just crawl themselves into. And so it's a really easy way to grow. Right here, I'm going to go into this new plant, is called a Hoya publicalis. Hoyas are also incredibly sought after and popular. They were a little while ago something that everyone wanted, and right now everyone kind of has one, and we're growing it, and people are liking them. But if you have a plant that if you want a plant that is very easy to take care of and loves to just kind of go very dry and just grow out, Hoyas are definitely ones to look into. This one in particular has a more lance-like leaf, so a longer leaf. It has some really interesting kind of splashy patterns on the leaves, which might be kind of hard to see in this indication or this plant species, but I have some other ones around. And also, I right now have it inside just a Tupperware container. And it's right now growing in a little sheet of moss. And so you can see the roots are going all throughout this moss and are holding it together right now. That's why I'm able to pull it out. And it's doing really, really well. I can see new growth, all this growth that's coming up above the horizon point of this little root loaf are all new growth, new stems. And then everything down below that's a little bit close to the bottom are the original cuttings from my mother plant, which I'm about to show you because it is one of my favorite plants I have right now, especially because it's flowering. A lot of people have asked me in the past how to get the Hoyas to flower and how you take care of a Hoya and how you want it to flower and all that kinds of stuff, because these plants are always sought after when they are flowering, and they don't flower very often. But right here is a mother plant. This is my Hoya publicalis. It looks kind of wild. It might be a little bit harder to see, but it has many, many stems all over it, lots of whips, and a good couple of flowers. Really, really pretty. Sometimes people call them wax plants or porcelain flower plants, just because these flowers are really distinct. They're very kind of structural. They're very waxy looking. I have a couple of them on this guy. When they're opened up, they have a nice flower. And then when they're closed, they look like a little star kind of pod that will pop open when they're ready. So they don't do it too often, but Hoyas will flower consistently if you have it for a long time. I find that a more mature plant will flower probably at least once a year, but you can definitely go for a couple of years without any flowers. This is probably the second year I finally got some flowers, and this is definitely the most amount I've ever seen on it. But one thing I wanted to show off about this plant is you can see it's a little bit lighter color. This plant is the same one because it's the mother of the one that you just saw. It's a little bit of a lighter color, and that's because it is sitting right in my window. I have a nice east-facing window that gets a lot of sun. I'm on a second story of an east-facing window, doesn't have anything blocking it. So every morning it gets a whole bunch of sunlight blasted onto it. And it is one of those plants that can survive that, but it will definitely show its stress. And that comes in the form of lighter coloration or even a kind of reddish coloration. You see this on succulents all the time, and this is a succulent leaf. But the more sun it gets, and even the less water it gets, but definitely the more sun it gets, the more the red in the cells, the more the pigment of the red comes out. And it's a good indication that your plant is going through a little bit more sun stress. It's not a bad thing. It can survive that, but a lighter coloration usually means less chlorophyll, which means a slower growth. So you might get a little bit of a slower growth, even if it is getting a lot of sun, just because it's getting a lot hitting it. It takes a little bit more water the more sun you get it as well. So just be careful of that. And if you're wondering why it's all this crazy whippiness all over it, that is what Hoyas do. It's a very interesting phenomenon that I'm still trying to figure out and understand how it works, but it will shoot out whips, which are stems that will go and they'll find somewhere to perch or to grab onto. They have little barbarous kind of root structures that are very stiff. They don't look like a normal kind of root. They just look like a little kind of almost spine to the stem. And they're all over these little whips. And then once they kind of find somewhere, or like a tree or a branch or one of your other plants or your pots or your windowsill, anything like that, and it can grab onto it, it will grab onto it. And usually that will also mean that it'll start growing leaves on that stem. Once, like the other ones we were talking about, where a plant feels like it has structure, if it has somewhere to hold on to, it is more likely to actually grow its leaves out. So right now I've been just winding this around itself. And that's why there are so many whips on it with not as many leaves up top, because it's just winding itself on and hasn't really found a nice structural point. But sometimes you can't give it to them and you have to try with what you have. But again, really cool flowers on them. If you want a plant that does flower, look towards the Hoyas. To help induce flowering, is always good to let it go a little bit more dry. If they are constantly wet, it seems like that they don't form the flowers as much, as well as a good amount of sunlight, and most likely some fertilizer. Something that has a little more phosphorus inside of it is always good for them, and that helps the flowering. But nitrogen in general is the good leaf growth. Yeah, hey Jen.
Yeah, this is great. A lot of good feedback. Just wondering, we're at about 45 minutes now. Can you talk a little bit about fertilizing, since you just sort of mentioned that? And also,
Yeah.
I know you kind of touched on it before, but picking plants for the right light exposure, how to know what's the best plant for the best location.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. And I have another plant or so I can kind of talk about with that, which is great because it's one of the ones I'm really excited to talk about, and I definitely want to get it in. So when you're talking about fertilization, you can definitely use lots of different kinds of fertilizers. There's many of them on the market, all over the place. Generally, I find that when you have a house plant and a plant in a pot, I like using liquid fertilizers. It's a little bit easier for me to use. I have so many watering cans around my room, many watering cans all over my house, in different sizes and shapes, just because having water around is always very helpful, and sometimes it's easier to get into the plant. But I also want to make sure that I am using a watering can with a fertilizer, and sometimes I keep watering cans that don't use any fertilizer. So I like having that distinction between different kinds of containers, mixing either fertilizers or nematodes or bacterial kind of drenches and all those kinds of things that you want to put into your plants. Have a few different cans for that. The fertilizer I use most likely, or most often, is Maxi. It's a very simple fertilizer. It has a higher nutrient value. Is a little bit on that synthetic side, so the numbers are a little bit higher. This is 16, 16, 16, as well as it uses kelp as its main component. So it's a little bit softer, and you don't have to worry about burning your plants too much or anything like that. It's a granular, so it's just like a bit of a dustier kind of mixture. I mix about 1 spoonful into a watering can. I'm never really that precise. It's, I think, 1 tablespoon per gallon is the common kind of application rate, but I just use a spoonful. I throw it into my watering can, throw some water in there, mix it up, and it's really easy to water with it. And then, so Maxi is one of them. And the other one I use quite often is tapping roots. These are just my 2 main ones. I find that tapping roots is not so much a fertilizer, it's more of a rooting hormone. And so it really helps with a lot of what I was talking about with propagation. Is if you take a little bit of it, you have your water where you're propagating, you just pour just a little bit, like a little mini spoonful, half a teaspoon or something like that in your little cans. Your water will turn a little bit brown, and it actually adds a lot of rooting hormone to your water or your soil, and it helps that initial root growth happen. It stimulates the capillary kind of roots, the little ones, to grow. So those are my main fertilizers I use. I think you can use any kinds you have that you like to use, whatever source you have. So it's always good to do it. For most houseplants, I would say once every 2 months is a great kind of just general fertilizer plants. It's good to fertilize, do it every couple of months. If you're doing it like once a year, you're usually okay, but your plants might not be growing as fast. If you're doing it every week, it might be a lot for the plants depending on your fertilizer. If you have a very light fertilizer, it's okay. If yours has a lot more nutrients in it, it might be adding too many components to your soil. It might kind of build up and it won't be as good for them. So kind of a nice regulation of every couple of months, fertilizing your plants is my best method, or my recommendation for adding nutrients to your soil. And you also mentioned how to choose plants for the right kind of situation. So absolutely talk to your garden center people, talk to someone like me, talk to someone like Jen or whoever's in the store, and ask them maybe what the plant wants, what the plant likes, and that can help first get you going for where you should put it in your room or your house or wherever you're going to put it. Plants that have darker leaves tend to be a little bit more on the lower light spectrum. Plants that have a lot of flowering, maybe like a little bit more of sunlight. just because they need a little more energy to get those flowers going, but it's not universal. It's kind of hard to completely give a recommendation for which one in which situation, but for the most part, all the plants I've talked about, the more heart-shaped green leaf ones can actually grow in a lot of different light spectrums. They do really well in some slightly shadier areas. The Tridescantias and the purple leaf ones I was talking about, like a little bit more sunlight. They actually get more purple the more sunlight they get. And I have a great example of that over here too. I have one of my favorite plants, Escananthus radicans, which is a kind of crazy name, but most people know it as the lipstick plant. And I actually have some little lipstick flowers on it right now. If I was to make one recommendation for everyone today to go find a plant or go take care of one of these plants, I would recommend this plant. I think a lipstick plant is beautiful and very easy to take care of. They make really nice little flowers that look like a little sheath with a red or whatever color it is, but usually red flower coming out of it. And that's why it's called a lipstick plant, because it looks like a little lipstick tube. But this variety in general has really nice, dark, shiny leaves. It's slightly succulentous, so it doesn't mind going a little bit dry. It actually can take a fair bit of sunlight, because I actually have this one right in the window as well. It's right in the window that actually gets a lot of light, but nothing super direct. And I think that's what's been key for its good, healthy growth is it's not so direct that it's constantly burning, but it has enough sunlight consistently for it to keep on growing. And I've had this flower, I don't think I've seen it stop flowering, which is a crazy statement to say, but I haven't seen it stop flowering for the past 3 years or so. I have a few of them in my house and they all are doing the same thing where it just keeps on popping out these little tubes. One thing to watch out for is like I said, have it right in the window, and it might be hard to see, but this is really kind of wrinkly and it has a little bit of kind of a discoloration on it. That comes from being right up against the window that has that temperature change, as well as a lot of extra sunlight. It damages the leaves a little bit. It kind of causes the top layer of all the chlorophyll and all the cells to kind of break up a little bit more. And so you might see some damage if you have it too close to the window. But in general, from far away, the plant looks really, really healthy. And I have another one, the same exact plant. And actually, like before, this is the propagation from the one I just showed you. And it's huge, right? It's actually really big. I have it in a larger bowl pot. I've been growing it for a little while, and I've actually grown it right in a window. So this is just showing that when you have a plant, you can grow them in a slightly, right in the window, but maybe a little bit less sunlight. And this is right in a very, very bright east-facing window. And it's quite purple. It really has a lot of purple color on it. And that comes from the cells getting a lot of sunlight and the purple, which I can't remember the pigment name right now, that starts to get produced and starts to show off more. So you have a different kind of coloration, same plant. It has the same kinds of flowers on it, little red tubes. And this was grown from a complete cuttings. I had maybe 10 or so cuttings of my plant. I put them in water for a couple of months or so, didn't really think about them too much. Finally was like, okay, they have lots of root systems. I need to do something with it. I put them all in this little pot. It looked a little bit sad. They're just little kind of cuttings inside a pot that didn't really have that much growth. And then I let it sit. I forgot about it for probably a year or so, watered it every once in a while. Some of my roommates also watered it. And so I came back to it recently and it was covered in flowers. It was bright purple. And that's just showing that sometimes it doesn't mean that the plant can only grow in a certain sunlight. They just react differently to the type of sunlight that it's in. So more sun will cause a little bit more stress on the leaves, but sometimes that comes out in a nice purple color. Sometimes that comes out in a dry leaf. So some plants can take it a little bit more than others. And this is a great example of a really pretty plant just doing its thing and growing in the situation that you give it. I'm gonna put this down because it's kind of heavy. And while I grab this other one, Jen, do you have some more questions?
I do. We have a lot of questions, so I kind of want to be sure we save some time for this.
We can go for a little bit longer. Yeah.
Well, this is really with regard to fertilizer. Somebody's asking, what are the three numbers mean on the fertilizer? That's important to know.
So when I said 16, 16, 16, it is the three numbers. It's a pretty common thing that we talk about. The first number is your nitrogen. So your nitrogen is your green growth. It's your stems. It's making sure the plant can actually grow. It's all of its vegetative growth, which means it's usually green growth depending on the color of the plant. And that's really good for a lot of different parts of the plant. It's probably the most notable or most talked about macronutrient is nitrogen. That's the first number. The middle number is your phosphorus, and that is the plant's root health and root growth, as well as the flowering. So almost always when we talk about a bloom food, we'll talk about a high phosphorus food. And that is something that is really helping those flowers stay healthy and strong, help produce the fruits, but also a lot of things that people don't talk about with phosphorus is it is really good for its root system. So having a nice healthy amount of phosphorus in your soil really gets the roots growing out nice and healthily. And then the last number is your potassium or your potash, so some people call it. And you can think of potassium, like I always think of bananas, but it is not really that defined on what it does completely for a plant, but it's always been described as the health of the plant. It's something that helps produce a lot of the different components have to have some potassium inside of it, as well as it helps protect it against diseases and fungal infections and all those kinds of things. And so it's always good to have a nice balanced amount of those nutrients. Some plants like a little bit more of some versus others, but in general, for most houseplants, an all-purpose fertilizer, which is usually a fairly neutral spectrum of those numbers, like similar number across the board, is what they usually would want. And if there's more specifics, then that's something that you can definitely talk about with your garden centers and be like, well, is there a reason why I might want to use a different fertilizer? But houseplants generally, it's all-purpose is the way to go.
Great. And do you have sort of in terms of watering, is there kind of, how often would you say most houseplants want water?
Yeah, it's a very simple question for a kind of complicated kind of thought process to answer. I find that I usually recommend get yourself onto a little bit of a schedule, at least to start with. If you have only a couple plants, it's pretty easy to maybe every Friday or maybe once a week, go check on that plant. Most houseplants don't need a lot of water, or they don't need to be like consistently watered, depending on the situation that you're in. I'm not saying not consistently water, but they don't need it like every day. When people come in, they say they water the plants every day. That's usually a sign of overwatering or some sort of problem situation. Or that plant is in such a dry soil mix, or it's very, very small. Little plants kind of change this idea. You have a really small plant in a very dry soil or very dry moss. You do need to water that maybe every other day or so. But most houseplants, like the ones I'm talking about, once a week is usually fine. Often once every 2 weeks works really well for especially larger ones or ones that are, they like to go a little bit dry. Some of the Hoyas I talked about like to go really dry. And also, I'm someone who has a lot of plants around me. So I find like I water every day, but I don't water the same plant every day. I go around and as I'm just spending my day or in my room or wherever I am, I'm looking at the structure of the leaves. I'm looking at how the plant's reacting. I'm looking at the soil. And if I feel like it might need water, I usually will lift it up. One of the best ways to find if a plant is dry is kind of give it a little bit of a lift. I have a good idea about how much it should weigh when it's really heavy with water and how much it should weigh when it's really light. It's very easy when you have like a kind of plastic pot because the pot doesn't really add that much weight to it. So that's my main method of checking how much water it needs, as well as, of course, putting your finger in the soil and feeling. I think touch, sight, weight are the biggest ways to tell if a plant needs water. And one thing that I will recommend when you have the idea of sight is a lot of plants will react by curling their leaves. The plant has water inside of its cells. It's called turgor pressure. And so when there's a lot of water in the cells, they're usually very open, they're very plump and full, and they're ready to take in as much light as they can take. But when they're very dry, they will tend to, all those cells kind of shrink up. And when cells shrink up, as you can imagine, they wrinkle and they kind of curve. And so if your plant is on the ceiling, I have one right over here. If your plant is not on the ceiling, but just around, this is another type of pothos. You can tell I have leaves that are totally curling. Really good indication that this plant is quite dry. I can tell it's very, very dry and it needs some water. The cool thing about a lot of these plants, a lot of these house plants, especially some of these vining ones, is when you give them water, they perk right back up. Some plants react a little bit poorly to being not watered for a little while. These ones are all very easy. When people consider an easy plant, it usually just means the plant won't die if you don't look at it for a little while. The plant will maybe shrivel up and hold itself for a good couple of weeks. If you only water it for a couple of weeks, and you give it water and it will open up again. The one stipulation is generally, especially these kinds, when you don't water it for a long time and it gets to a point where it's very, very wrinkled, when it does fill up with water and it looks nice and healthy again, you'll often have a couple leaves that will go yellow on you. And I've noticed that on many of my pothos and many of my aroids in general, is that when I don't water it for a little while, I do have a little bit more of a leaf drop. It's totally fine. It's natural. It's them responding to not having a lot of their nutrients or their water to kind of keep on growing. So they will kill off a few of their leaves. And it doesn't mean your plant's dying or anything like that. It just means that maybe it wasn't watered at the right time. But that's like a good example of look for your leaves, look how they're reacting. Sometimes plants will even like sag their leaves a little bit. They'll look very like limp. Look at the top of the soil. If the soil looks very dry and cracked, or it's coming in from the sides of the pot. If you ever see a soil that is kind of squishing in from the side of the pot and you see a opening around the rim, that usually means that the soil is very, very dry. It's probably fairly hydrophobic at this point. So you need to make sure you give it a little bit of attention, slowly water it, open up those cells, let them actually take the water in. So that's like that's my best recommendation for watering, is just being very inattentive, coming back at least once a week to all your plants just to check on them, as well as just having water available. I find that if I have a bucket of water or a couple watering cans full of water around my room, I don't tend to underwater my plants as much because I always have something available when I'm thinking about it. But if I don't have any water around me and I see a plant dry, I have to take that extra effort to go find the water and bring it back. So I think having it available and then checking on your plants is my recommendation.
Yeah, and I would say what we see a lot I would say indoor plants is overwatering more than underwatering, wouldn't you say? I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah,
But
no, it's totally.
and so better to err on the side of underwatering, because once it's rotted out, you can't bring it back from being rotted out. But I
Yeah.
did also want to mention that a difficult part about indoor plant watering is, sometimes you can't water it so much that it's like leaks onto your floor or on a countertop or whatnot. And so we're just watering a little bit at a time, which doesn't fully saturate the roots. So what I've always said, and I don't know if you agree, Taylor, but if we can maybe like quarterly take the plants out on the patio or put them in the shower or something like that, where we can thoroughly rinse the water through the container, that's great. Because otherwise a lot of soil or a lot of salt can build up in the container, and that can burn your plants too. So
Absolutely. I think Jen brings up one of the biggest points that people don't know sometimes, or that it really helps out with a lot of care, is a lot of times we just do these small things to keep your plants alive. You water them a fair bit, or you should definitely try and fully water your plants when you do water them. But sometimes it's easy just to give it a little bit, just keep it going because you don't have a lot of time and you want to water them. But coming back every couple of weeks, or maybe twice a month, or once a month, or even once a year sometimes for some plants, and giving them a full treatment, give them a spa day, bring them outside, bring them into your shower, whatever you want to do, wash off your leaves, kind of check on your root system, clean off the sides, and then give it a really good healthy dose of water. And that will flush out, like you said, a lot of those salts. Our soil, our fertilizers, our air, our water has a lot of salts and different kinds of ions and stuff inside of it. And those absolutely build up in your soil. And so if it's at the very bottom of your soil and you have a lot of that kind of stuff, it will definitely damage your root systems. I think that's one of the biggest causes of root rot, is just kind of stagnant, kind of gross water and soil at the very bottom of your pot, and those roots kind of die off, and that slowly reflects onto the plant. Because if you have roots dying, then your plant's going to show it somewhere in the leaves. So yeah, I think it's a great idea. I definitely will bring out my plants and do a full wash down every once in a while, and I think it's the best way to keep them nice and healthy. When I was holding some of the plants earlier, I've noticed that I have a lot of dust on my leaves, and I don't think that's a great idea either. Dust can stop the sun from hitting the leaves properly and lighting up those photoreceptors, as well as bugs and stuff. And I know bugs is a big topic that I know many people want to know about, and it's a lot to talk about. But one of the biggest things you have to worry about with a lot of very dusty plants, or kind of plants you don't look at for a while, spider mites are one of the biggest things that happen to those. I have definitely found spider mites in all my plants very recently. I think last night I found some on one of my plants. So they happen. You know, it's part of growing plants, especially when you have a lot of them. Spider mites, aphids, mealybugs, they all happen. It doesn't mean that you're doing anything too wrong, but it definitely means that you can take some steps to clean them up and work on them. I'll quickly mention it because I know I'm going to get the question, what do you do with them? Washing them off with water is a great way. Sometimes using different kinds of sprays that we have in the store. So I use either neem oil or all seasons oil as my main sprays. Neem oil has a bit of a smell, so I try not to use it too much in my indoors, but it works really well on aphids. I find it's the one I use mainly for like aphid problems. And then all seasons oil is what I use for scale or mealybug, because I think it's nice that it doesn't smell as bad and it breaks up their exoskeleton a little bit more. So those are my general just sprays for those kinds of bugs. But also I think physically removing them is your best bet, and cleaning off your plants. If you do a shower every once in a while or actually wipe off your plants, you tend to get rid of those problems a lot more.
I love the idea of a spa day for your plants.
Yeah, everyone needs a spa
I've
day, and
never
your
thought
plants do
about
too.
that. Yeah, I mean, we all need a spa day every once in a while.